Good morning, comrades. You are listening to WHIVLP New Orleans 102.3. This is Good Morning, Comrade.
I'm
Today
all
on the
right. I'm
show,
a
we
little
got
better after
Jeff
getting over
and Robert.
COVID.
Robert, how you doing, bro?
Baldur's Gate 3 up, Diablo 4 down, and my parents ducked another hurricane. Tampa Bay still undefeated for like 100-year hurricane champs.
Oh, that's right. Wow. Yeah, we could just bring in our guest real fast, David Gomez. David, what's going
David.
on?
What's up? I'm
David
David.
is David is a labor lawyer, and he came in to talk about Cemex with him. But you're coming from California, right?
I am. Yeah, I'm in Oakland. That's where I'm based out of. Oakland.
Yeah, so we're not like
we're
not like worried about
bad.
hurricanes over there. Well, I guess we were last week in like Southern California because they can hit anywhere now. But
I guess
how you doing, buddy?
anywhere's in limit.
Yeah, anywhere, any coast. Just like it's kind of wild. I feel like we were kind of on our own for a little bit down here. But yeah, now it's now the fear has been spread because of the horrible unstoppable downward spiral that the climate has been going down.
Real
So
bad.
that's kinda
It's real
fun.
bad, dude.
I don't
Like,
know.
I feel like we're creating our own end times right now, or we already have. This just feels like, it feels like the end of days, for sure. But it's not, because scientists and people have been telling us this for since I was a little kid. I remember reading about the ozone layer in our like elementary school textbooks, and lo and behold, like who could have guessed? Here we are now with the hottest day on Earth, like every other dang day, with multiple hurricanes because the poor Earth is trying to cool itself off. I love this timeline. It doesn't suck at all.
Well, it's really cool because like you get to see like you have like 33 or like something else like acres in Louisiana like on fire, which has never happened before, and then you see the governor like posting on Facebook like there's a burn order like statewide.
They're enthusiastically like
Don't
pleading
burn
with
anything.
us not to grill and not to tailgate. Like they're trying to they are trying to go after the big tailgates, like the ones that like the commercial ones that you can like pay for. It's like you ever done one of those where it's like, oh, $100 and you like it's food and all the booze you can drink before the game or whatever. But they're trying to shut those down in New Orleans off of Poydras.
Yeah,
You can't be burning stuff.
bro. Monday is Labor Day, and
Burn ban
like,
means
supposed to be,
burn
like,
ban.
picnics
What
and stuff,
part
like
of
the
burn
AFL-CIO in
did
New
you not
Orleans.
understand? Okay, so I believe I'm an authoritarian
Yeah.
socialist. So
And,
violate
like-
the burn ban at your against your own peril, because Big Daddy government. I am
Yeah,
Big
hit the
Brother's
wall.
snitch. So let me see you. Let me see you lighting up a square, a cigarette on the street that's burning. I'm calling the fire cops.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, we brought David on to subject us to our local New Orleans banter, but also to talk about a really like major development that happened with the National Labor Relations Board this week. Like I mentioned earlier, David is a labor lawyer, so he has experience with this thing. He actually read it. He actually understands these kind of things. I'm usually just like kind of talk about them without knowing that much, so maybe he can actually help illuminate our audience on this sort of situation. So, what's going on with the NLRB, and what's the deal?
Yeah. Like you mentioned, there's this big decision that came out. Feels like forever ago, but I think it was 2 days ago. Cemex, and it's a pretty big deal. I mean, it's a seismic shift in labor law. And if you want proof of that, all you have to do is go to all the big corporate law firms' websites and see how much they're freaking out. Which is an enjoyable browse. You can browse those big corporate law firms, and you can find a lot of good things framed as bad things. Like the fact that people will be able to unionize, and the employers might face penalties if they break the law.
Well, hold on a second. So, like, you're saying that there might be rules on employers that are enforceable?
It seems like it. That's
Yeah,
the direction that this country is headed, apparently.
that seems too good to be true, honestly.
No, yeah. Well, yeah, I wouldn't quite take the big law attorneys at face value, but I do think it's a big deal. I do think it's going to lead to changes in the way unions can organize, and the way elections are held, but also um, the way employers are kind of reined in and held to account.
Hmm. Well, let's get into it. So, like, when this decision sort of like went before the NLRB, what were the sort of rules, and what were some of the things that like employers would do to sort of ward off, kind of a union at their workplace amongst their workers? Like, what was some of the things that they would pull, and then we can kind of get into sort of like what happened here, and like a little bit of the, we can talk a little bit of the history of it now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think to get an idea, like to get a sense of what it is that employers do, it's helpful to look at the facts in this case. This started off in 2018, all the way back then. The Teamsters were organizing in Southern California, as well as in Las Vegas. And at this company, Cemex, which is a ready-mix concrete kind of company. I think these were mostly drivers. I'm not entirely sure, but cement truck drivers, and basically the Teamsters, these workers were organizing for their union, and they had their election in March 2019. So we're already 4 years past that, but they narrowly lost by like 13 votes. And then the way this kind of goes is after an election, that's when you kind of get to hash out some of the bad practices that the employers were doing. It's kind of like a chaotic scramble at the end. I'm sure anyone who's helped organize in any capacity can attest. The union filed unfair labor practice charges, basically asserting or alleging that certain things that the employers did were wrong. In this case, they mentioned to some workers, or they made a comment to some workers that the factory or the workplace might shut down, the company might shut down, I guess.
Which is like one of those things that happens all the time.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Right.
it's like always framed as like, oh, by the way, this is just like some information, but it's like obviously a threat. Like, it's very obviously a threat. Like, if you form a union here, we're going to shut this whole thing down, and you're not going to have
Totally. It's a classic, violation of the law too. It happens all the time. One of the other things I think is important to note is that Cemex, they hired one of those union avoidance, quote unquote, union avoidance firms, spending like $1 million on that firm in a very short period of time. And it was those union avoidance people, like, they go around from employer to employer doing the same stuff.
Oh, it's a whole like industry. It's like a whole part of the economy. There is just like a corner of the world that like most normal people going through their lives don't know about. But like there's entire law firms like Littler Mendelson and all these other like demon spawn from hell that like literally spend their entire time their entire reason, the way that they make millions and millions of dollars is by preventing businesses from preventing unions, basically.
Right, that's right. And so some of the people from that union avoidance firm were the ones that made these comments saying that the company was going to shut down, that the workers, if they sorry, can you hear me, Jeff? Or?
Yes.
Yeah. And so the company would shut down, that if workers unionized, they would lose, their wages would go down, basically. All these things like that. And then, in the aftermath, with the ULP,
unfair labor practice.
Unfair labor practice. A judge from the NLRB said, and this is way back. A judge said, yes, that's true. They violated the law here. Another thing that's important is there was a woman, a worker who was fired, basically for supporting the union, and the judge also agreed. Yes, she was fired for supporting the union. So these are obviously illegal practices. And at the time, the Teamsters celebrated that ALJ's decision because it agreed with them. One of the problems is, and this is the big shift, is that judge, he agreed. They violated the law. But what is the remedy? You do another election. That's what the remedy has been for many
I understand that because
years now.
I was going to say, yeah, I can
like
understand it because
And
that's
we've
worst
seen
case
it happen.
scenario for them. But at the end of the day, that worst case scenario is exactly what they wanted, was to stop and delay the election, because the longer they can delay, they can keep kicking it down the road. The weaker they can have support, make support for the union.
And
Not
we've seen-
only that,
I'm sorry, I was going to say we've seen this happen, like with the Bessemer election in Alabama. Go on.
right, exactly. Yeah, the Bessemer election in Alabama, that is a good example of a similar rerun election after an employer is found to have violated the law. And one of the problems with that as a remedy is there's such a thing as scorched earth. The employer can do all these things. They can, fire someone in this case. And what do you think the other workers are going to do? They're going to be scared, and so we could run the election again, but the damage has been done in many cases, right? And so that's how the law kind of treated these kinds of violations until 2 days ago. And so, yeah, I just wanted to lay out kind of the history of this case, but it's a history, like you mentioned with Bessemer, that has many, 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 many similar events that we can all point to. And a lot of times what happens is instead of even rerunning the election, I mean, a lot of times unions are just, they recognize, like, well, we're not going to be able to win now. They fired all our supporters. They don't want to go back there. They're not, it's not a good place, obviously, which is why we were trying to unionize. And yeah, so it's kind of depressing, but that's how things have been for a long time. Going back, I think some would say to this case, Linden Lumber, which came in the 70s. Yeah.
And that was another one of those sort of like situations where a worker or something was fired, an unfair labor practice was sort of filed, and like we basically said, yeah, okay, just redo the election, and that's sort of like where that precedent began. But it changed now. There's new rules that are
Right.
that are in place. So really quick, let's do station ID, and then we can get to what some of those new rules are. You listen to the HIV LP New Orleans 102.3. This is Good Morning Comrade. Jeff and Robert here with David Gomez. David is a labor lawyer, and we're talking about the Cemex decision from the National Labor Relations Board and some of the new rules that are being sort of, introduced that are really sort of sweeping changes. And David, if you want to sort of talk about what some of those changes are, take it away.
Yeah. So with the Cemex decision, the board was asked by the general counsel, and I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with, all the listeners are, to the way the National Labor Relations Board works. But there's the board, which is kind of like the adjudicatory body. Like, these are more or less judges of labor law. And then there's the general counsel, and her name's Jennifer Abruzzo, and she's kind of like the prosecutor of labor law. So she brings cases before the board she says, hey, I think these people's rights were violated. And then the board is the one that makes the law and says yes or no. In this case, this decision came from the board based on the general counsel bringing this case after as I mentioned before, the ALJ made their decision that there should be a rerun election. the general counsel said, no, actually, I think that there should be a bargaining order. I think that this employer should be ordered to bargain. There's, a rerun election is not enough. That's what the general counsel was saying. She asked the board to revisit something that I think a lot of people might have heard about, which is Joy Silk as a standard. And order bargaining. That was the reason she brought it. And what the board said was, we're not going to quite go to Joy Silk, and there's some reasons for that they lay out, but I think it's important first to kind of lay out what they did do. So they created this new standard called Cemex, and it does a couple of things. I think there's two big thrusts of it. The first is it now kind of it requires employers to file a petition or voluntarily recognize a union when they're presented with a group of workers that are showing majority support. So basically, you and your coworkers get together, sign cards saying we want to unionize, present it to your boss. At that point, the company can either recognize the union and start to bargain with you, or they can file a petition for an election with the NLRB.
So that is not a significant change from the past yet, right? We haven't gotten to the point where it's a significant change yet, have we?
It's a little bit that is a change. It's not as significant, but it's a change in that before the employer didn't have to do anything. The union would eventually have to file a petition.
Oh, so the burden went on. The burden switched from the union to the employer. Okay, that's interesting.
Right. And what that does, it does a number of things. The first things that it does, I think, is it creates, it basically helps prevent some of the delays with employers have to respond now. They have to acknowledge. A lot of times, some of what employers like to do is they pretend nothing's happening. They close their eyes, they plug their ears, and they pretend nothing's happening. Delay. Right, yeah. Now they have to acknowledge their workers are trying to unionize and request an election, which is different than it has been. But that's one option. The other option, of course, is to voluntarily recognize. If they do neither now, the board will say, okay, so you're not responding. That's unlawful. You have to respond. So if they don't respond, we're going to issue a bargaining order, which is a change, right? Instead of being allowed to delay indefinitely, at least they'll have to respond. And then if not, they're ordered to bargain and recognize the union without an election. There's no election, right, at that point.
Yeah, you got the union.
Yeah.
That would be like card check, right? If we got the 50% plus one.
Almost.
That would
almost the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Jeff loves to talk about card check.
So they have to respond or you get the union. So
like he can't stop saying card check like whenever he feels appropriate.
Like talk about card check.
It would be. It'd be awesome.
Card check would be good.
And it would be good. It would be. The second thing that it does is it says, in circumstances where previously the board would have issued a rerun election, instead, we're going to issue a bargaining order. And with that, so what are the circumstances where they would have issued a rerun election? A lot of these stems from this period, what's called the critical period in the run-up to an election. So you file for an election, you get a date, and then you start talking to your coworkers, trying to get people to vote yes for the union. That period of time, that is the critical time. If the employer does an unfair labor practice during that time, instead of a rerun, they're now going to be actually punished from the employer's perspective, of course, by being ordered to bargain and recognize the union. And that's a big deal. That's a huge deal because the incentives change. They no longer are incentivized. For decades at this point, employers are incentivized to break the law,
Mm-hmm.
because what's the worst that can happen?
Uh-huh.
We run it again, and then we do it again.
Mhm.
You know, and so that's a big change. It's you know, yeah. So yeah,
And
it's going to result in a more just remedy for workers whose rights are being violated.
yeah, and to put sort of an example to this, when we talked about Bessemer earlier, they ran that election twice. The reason that they ran it a second time was because Amazon broke a bunch of laws. And they did
Hmm.
like all kinds of wild things. They did the closed door meetings that we talked about earlier that are not legal. They went to the point where they like changed traffic lights so that like you couldn't like canvas at people's car windows and all these other things. And essentially, if instead of running that election twice in Alabama at that Amazon facility, instead of running it twice, they would have just gotten their union
Right.
had this current law been in place.
Right. That's a great point. Yeah. I mean, that would have been a huge facility too, right?
Oh
I
yeah,
mean,
massive facility, thousands of workers.
yeah, and yeah, and and the fact that it happened in that case, which is a little more famous because it's a big facility, but it happens in workplaces across the country every single day too, in in every state, and I think another point that I think it's important to make is that the board did go a little bit out of their way to state outright that this is retroactive, that this applies to all cases that are pending before the board.
Yeah.
Or if it's not already before the board, if it's something that's happened within the previous 6 months, which is the statute of limitations, it applies to that as well. So I think that's a big win too, because every we don't have that much time to win. So
Yeah.
as climate change is showing us, yeah, yeah,
So and like so that really opens a lot of doors for not just like ongoing campaigns. I'm thinking about Starbucks, and I'm thinking about some of these
hmm
Amazon fights that have they've quieted down a little bit, but they could very easily be reignited with this rule change. But also, I mean, in sectors that like have seemed impenetrable in the past, seem a lot more possible to organize. I guess you want to talk about that a little bit.
yeah. I mean, one of the things with um, a lot of the sectors that are quote unquote hard to organize. Um, One of the things that we see in those sectors all the time is just egregious unfair labor practices. That's one of the reasons they're hard to organize, right? Especially with vulnerable workers, or immigrant workers, or people of color. You see all the time that employers get away with unfair labor practices against them because people are too scared to speak up, or they get a different job, or they don't know that the board exists, or whatever reason. But with a remedy such as this, which is a bargaining order, I mean that's a heavy hammer that we can wield against the employers in these sectors.
Mhm.
I'm thinking of fast food, for example, where you see egregious ULPs all the time, um, and it's difficult to get momentum there because of that.
Yeah, I mean they fire people like left, right, and center, just all over the place
Yeah.
because they're like it's these sort of quote unquote unskilled labor um,
Hmm.
sectors. Which, by the way, if you've never worked at McDonald's or Chipotle or Burger King or anything, those jobs are really effing hard. Like I worked at a Burger King when I was in
Yeah.
high school, and it was just like if you've never gotten through a dinner rush, oh my gosh, dude.
No, I do not miss. I have a desk job now, and I am grateful for that because yeah, I can't standing on your feet all day alone. It's pretty difficult, and let alone all the hassle and if you look at fast food, the abuse that workers receive from
Mhm.
management, customers everywhere.
The equipment.
Yeah,
if you
yeah,
work
the
at fire,
equipment.
if you work at fire, you know what I'm talking
Oh
about.
my
You
god.
get some burns. But no, so this is a really good sort of way that this is going to be pushed forward, and it seems to me, if you're somebody who is a major decision maker, a union leader, like now's time to invest in organizing. Now is the chance because this is like we said before, America is very very hostile to union organizing historically speaking, but this is sort of like a historic change, and now it's time to be on the front foot and charging, right?
Absolutely. I think I saw a poll earlier today that I forget what the age demographic was. It was the youths.
Oh yeah, I
Um,
saw that poll too.
some, Something like 88% support for unions amongst the youths.
Yeah.
I mean, that's exciting to see. It has not always been like that my
No.
whole life. And not only that, but if you, I forget who put out the poll, but there was all kinds of awesome, support for unions. They polled, they polled specifically support for unions and then support for employers. And it was a pretty drastic difference in support amongst the public. So it's something a lot of people, sometimes even people you wouldn't think of as being pro worker. A lot of people can get behind. Organizing workers.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, and this is something that we've seen just more generally as well. I mean, that is a shockingly high number. 88% of young people, like
Yeah.
Gen Zers, I guess, are in support of.
You can't agree on anything at that level.
Yeah, no,
That's
you can't
yeah.
agree what color the sky is, But and then union favorability just sort of generally has been at like 60%, or higher in the past like
Mhm.
what 5-10 years, and this is like an opportunity that the tides have changed, and like even with a sort of like reactionary high court or in the country or whatever. I mean, it would be a pretty significant deal if they would have, somehow. I'm not sure what the legalities or whatever of it is, but I imagine that there are ways that they could push back against this. But it would be, they would come at a political cost, to be sure.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I guess before we get off too much on the Cemex decision, the last thing I want to highlight, I mentioned, first and foremost that the employers are now kind of required to respond. Secondly, that there's this remedy of a bargaining order if they do things that are unlawful during the election period. But the other thing I think it's important to highlight is my hope would be that means employers don't engage in those kinds of hostile, unlawful practices.
Yeah.
Because I mean, the reality is that decision it should incentivize if they're smart, and I'm not saying that they are, because they're not. But it should incentivize them to allow their workers to make that decision free from their interference, which is what the law is supposed to require. It's not up to the employer whether or not their workers unionize. It's up to the workers. That's what the law says. It's what it's always said. And my hope would be that this decision gets us towards that.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah,
Totally.
It's yet to be seen.
Yeah, yet to be seen. I'm also hopeful towards that. I also, share some of the skepticism in terms of, what the action on the part of those employers will be. But yeah, I'm hopeful that compliance occurs. And again, this is like one of those sorts of things. Oh, let me really pause for station ID. You listen to HIV LP New Orleans 102.3. This is Good Morning Comrade, Jeff and Robert, and our guest David. Gomez, a labor lawyer, talking about the Cemex decision that recently came out just this week from the National Labor Relations Board. And again, we talked a little bit about the sort of industry of the union busting industry, essentially union avoidance, they call themselves. And you mentioned a couple of the headlines. I did a little Google search, I just Googled Cemex, and I see Little Mendelson, just like one of the first things that come up, and it's just like freaking out because it's like this is not exactly card check, but it's awfully close, and like some of these other sorts of things, which is an existential like threat to this entire industry, right? They're going to defend themselves.
Right. Well, and what I want to point out is it's only card check if they're breaking the law. You know, like
it's true.
That's what the point that I was making with if employers behave fair and how they should, then they can have their election and the workers will decide free from the unlawful practices. So, you know, that kind of, you know, freak out from the employer side, it's a little bit, it's telling, you know, it's telling that they will continue to break the law because
that's because they're not the employers. They're
even the employers. I mean, they're not going to stop breaking the law until it costs them more to break the law than it costs them to follow the law. Right now, it's just it's a really good business expense to just do what you want to do and then beg for forgiveness later. Like it's just smart. It's smart capitalism, and it's terrible.
Right. So yeah. So that gets to kind of Jeff's point, right? With the it's an existential threat for the industry because if it becomes more financially logical to not pay them and then you're right. Yeah, that's an existential threat to that industry.
And they're going to find a way to, like, I guess, I don't know. Like, I'm sort of like thinking about like what is the next sort of like steps for. Maybe I'm just sort of like overthinking it. But like, how are they going to do? Like, how are they going to do union busting without getting a ULP? Because the ULP actually matters now, which it didn't before.
I mean, right. And I think, well, the first thing I would say, and this might be because I am a lawyer, so I am broken in the brain, but I'm, you know, there's the real risk that they appeal the decision. You know, it's a Ninth Circuit, well, the facts, you know, Southern California, Las Vegas, these are in the Ninth Circuit. So if they appeal, it would be to the Ninth Circuit. But they could also appeal to the DC Circuit. Because it's board activity, and who knows, it could make its way. Those are both, you know, not the worst circuits. They could come out with a pro labor opinion. You know,
well, the Ninth Circuit is like the one that's like, oh, that's the liberal circuit or whatever, right?
Yeah. Although it's been inundated with Trump appointees, and at this point, you know, I would say its reputation is a little bit too. It's not really that, you know, great right now, but but in any case, they could appeal it and it could get upheld in either of those circuits. I think it's a sound, you know, they didn't go all the way to Joyce Silk, and I think that the differences between this case and Joyce Silk make it far more defensible in court. At the same time, if it goes from the Ninth Circuit, it could go to Supreme Court, and at that point, you know, anything could happen.
Yeah. Well,
they don't care whether or not it's defensible. They're going to do what they want to do.
I guess like thinking about this a little bit, since we're kind of already going down that road, if it does go to the Supreme Court, at least at the, well, I maybe I have a little bit of hope about these kinds of things, but not that much. But like Roberts, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, has proven to be like a little bit sort of like doesn't want to like enrage public opinion. He's trying to like keep it sort of smart, and I think that like some of these popular positions, like 88% youth, you know, favorability for unions and things like that, might prevent somebody like him, who like is a don't get it twisted. He's like a anti-labor elite, like right wing, you know, Chief Justice, no question. But he has proven in the past, or at least shown in the past, of like wanting to at least appear as though he's sort of like
Right.
deliberative about these sort of things. And so that might
Yeah.
be something that can, and obviously this could be blown away in a second, but like at least there are political consequences that could be sort of like considered in this big question here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And all these things, they'll take time to trickle up. Who knows what might happen in that time? There's a lot of old people on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, yes, they are.
But and I will say, John Roberts would present sadly only a fourth vote because
Yeah,
it's
true.
6-3 right now. But who knows? They might not take it up.
Yeah.
That's just one of the risks. And I'm sure that if it were up to the union avoidance industry, if it were up to employers, they would take it up and overrule it, which would be totally absurd, illogical. But we've seen the Supreme Court do totally absurd, illogical things many times. Sorry, Jeff, you're muted.
I said they never cared about that in the past. Why would they start now?
Exactly. Right. Yep. But yeah.
I think it's important also to sort of zoom in on the fact that Abruzzo and the current National Labor Relations Board are appointees of the president, and like there's a lot of like talking and hand wringing and like especially amongst the the American left about like Democrats provide nothing, and to a large extent I agree with a lot of that kind of stuff, but also in many situations like this is some of the upsides of that. I guess you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, like yourself, I'm often skeptical of how far Democrats or anyone will go for workers, but I do think as far as this administration, I've seen far more than any other administration in my lifetime. I've been following labor issues since I was very young. My mom's a teacher activist. I grew up with a lot of skepticism of the Democrats because of that. Yeah.
The only person that well, I'm not going to get into it. Yeah. I was going to crack on Randy Weingarten for a second, but I'm not going to do
it. My mom, proud AFT member, but yeah.
I was an AFT member for years.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. But I would just say with the labor stuff, not Jennifer Abruzzo, but also the board that made this decision, including David Prouty and Gwyn Wilcox, who come directly from labor unions. That's where they worked before they were appointed to the board. And you look at other parts like Lena Khan and Julie Su in the Department of Labor. Those are definitely the high points. The labor issues are the high points of this administration. You could look at other issues and maybe not, but I would say it's this decision in particular is emblematic of that, because it's not just going back to the Obama years. The Obama years were not that great on labor issues. Let's be real. They were pretty bad.
I was going to say, like we've seen bad from we see bad from Republicans all the time, but we've definitely seen worse from Democrats on this issue as well.
Right. I mean, you go to Obama, you go to Bill Clinton. They were just anti-labor in many ways. But this board in particular and this general counsel, they've gone far beyond that. I mean, this is something that we haven't seen since the 70s in terms of how pro-labor of a decision it is. It's a seismic shift, really. And we'll wait to see its impact, but at least on paper, it looks really good.
Not really, man. I mean, every time you get Robert, I know this is like your wheelhouse, so it's like I get an education on labor like every time, because things are. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, especially with the Hollywood strike. Is like things are looking up, and like this is one of the few This is one of the few sectors where I feel like as leftists we are getting constant W's down the pike, like constant wins. And it's like, man, I'm sitting here waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for things to get really bad like they always do, but we just keep rolling with labor, man.
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
And I mean,
it's a slow but steady march, hopefully.
Well, then steady. I mean, maybe it could be a little quicker, but definitely keep it steady.
Yeah.
Double pace potentially, but keep it steady. Yeah, I don't know, and I can't always like. I kind of get like super freaked out, like especially around these like election times, because you never know. Like in 2016, I mean, like obviously everybody railed on Hillary Clinton the entire time, of course, but like when like she lost, it was just like what is going to happen now? How bad is it going to get? And like I don't know, I'm sort of like looking at like
he's a
Trump
demon,
again, or it
yeah.
could be like Vivek Ramaswamy, who's like literally just like saying you have to. Yeah, I saw in the what was it? It was Tim Scott, I think, in the Republican debate last week, who literally just said that like we have to like take out teachers union to destroy them, essentially. like these people are like literally licking their chops to destroy workers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the other side is
go ahead. Yeah.
Anyway,
going after it.
Yeah, I don't know what else there is to add to that, but I don't know. In terms of like what you see going forward, like what is the sort of next steps from this? Like what are we seeing here? I mean, like what do you think?
I mean, my hope would be that workers see this. They recognize that they have rights, and that if the employer violates the rights, the government is there to enforce them. That would be my hope. To see some bargaining orders. I think it's going to take some major bargaining orders to get employers in line. I don't think they're going to immediately respect or acknowledge what this decision stands for until we start to see orders coming through forcing them to do so.
So I have a question on terms of, you mentioned bargaining orders several times. What is the sort of consequence if the employer refuses to comply with a bargain order?
Yeah. Well, I guess that would be another unfair labor practice.
Okay.
I think it's another area where there can be delay. We've seen employers not comply with bargaining orders, and I guess the reality is it is another area where there can be delay that can drain the blood out of a campaign as well.
Yeah.
Just the time that it takes. But I guess eventually, I think the NLRB could then get an order from a court enforcing their bargaining order. Obviously, that would come eventually with contempt. Depending on how far the employers are going to take it.
Can we see employees being thrown into jail over this, please?
Right. I mean, if they take it down, we're seeing some definite jail potential for people who didn't have that before. So it's kind of, that's promising. But
no, seriously.
This is
we
why
joke about that all the
abolition.
time. Like I'm all about police. It's like abolition of police until like it's a Karen getting arrested at the airport, and I'm just like, put her under the jail. But yeah, for sure, dude.
I would say this is why this decision is great. It's groundbreaking. It's different than things have been in the past, but there is way more we could be doing, way more we should expect from our legislators in particular. Like with the PRO Act, for example, one of the provisions in the PRO Act is there's a timeline on bargaining. If you don't get your act together as an employer and sit down with your workers to bargain after they've won their union, either through a bargaining order or through an election or through voluntary recognition, then you go to arbitration, and the judge at arbitration decides what's fair as a contract. And that, that could cut either way, but I think generally it would cut against employers who have an upper hand when it comes to delaying outcomes like that. So that's one of the things that is in the PRO Act that is, it would go further than what the current landscape is.
Yeah. The PRO Act, I mean, like, again, politically speaking, like, that's one of those sorts of things that we haven't heard very much from in a while, but it's something that can come back, and it's another reason, I guess, that, elections and these sort of, political, situations that, I hate them, but it's one of these sorts of things where they matter, and you have to deal with it,
Right. No, yeah, there's I think that the PRO Act has a lot more juice than this decision, as great as it is. I think last time we got like 50 or something, 49 Democrats or something to support it. Mm-hmm. It was very close. Obviously, at the same time, there was people like Cinema or others who did not want to support it. So now, again, similar to our union campaigns, delay is an enemy, and they were able to just delay a vote on that.
Oh my God, forever.
Until we lost the House. We can't do anything now.
Can't do anything ever. Yeah, we just like and then just like blame, and it's always like.
Which goes to leadership too, right?
Yeah.
Right.
No. Yeah. Leadership likes to say it's not because we didn't do anything. It's because like people were mad about like some kid getting murdered in Minnesota or something, and the people got upset about it and marched in the streets. That's the problem, not the fact that we just stand here in Washington with our hands in our pockets and we don't fight for anything. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Not to get too like. I don't know. Not to get too like weird about it, but
But yeah, I think generally speaking, what I'd like to see is workers file for elections, file ULPs, get bargaining orders, hold their employers accountable, and bargain for better working conditions collectively. Mm-hmm. And hopefully this will go a little ways towards that.
Yeah, great. Well, cool.
No, man. Again, just love to hear about a
Robert,
win
what you
every
got,
now
man?
and then instead of us just complaining about how terrible the world is. I like to see some progress.
Yeah. There's some other wins this week. We could also bring up, which is the one of the other things the board did this week is they went back to the Obama era election rules, which basically means the election processes will go faster. Like we've been saying this whole time, delay and time works against the workers and it's in favor of employers. So those election changes are pretty cool. It's crazy that it took them 2 years to go back to something that we had under Obama.
Disrespect it.
No disrespect to the board.
Let the tea be spilled.
Them, but, but yeah,
they got around to it.
Yeah, they did go back to those rules that the Trump rules were awful. Just allowed massive delays. Yeah, awful. But that's one thing. The other thing I think is pretty big is the Department of Labor's overtime rule change. I don't know if you saw that one, but so the way overtime works is the way salary labor works is if you're a salaried worker, you don't get overtime, right? You get your salary.
Yeah, you work 80 hours, but you're getting paid 40.
Right. But there is a rule, stemming back to the Fair Labor Standards Act way back, that basically salary work wasn't intended to encompass everyone. It's just been kind of employers using it as a way to get around 40-hour work week. And one of the ways that the Department of Labor analyzes whether or not someone should be salaried is how much they make. So if you make right now $35,000 or less, then you can be salaried, or then you can't be salaried. You have to be paid, overtime if you work more than 40 hours. Well, I mean, yeah, you can get paid salary rate equivalent, but if you work 45 hours, you get overtime. Even if you're salaried. They raised that threshold to 55,000.
Great, that's excellent.
Today, which is really good. So what that means is, in a lot of this country, if you're making $40,000 and you're salaried and you're being worked 80 hours,
okay. Heck yeah.
That's unlawful now. So at this point, you let's say, I think it's around 55,000, a little more than that. So if you make 50,000, 2,000, at this point, log your hours, keep track of them, keep a journal, calendar, and it might come in handy someday.
Nice. That's
Yeah.
a good tip. Anything else coming out about the board? I mean, that's a really huge development right there. It seems like.
Yeah, the overtime thing I think is really big because we see that all the time. In California it's a little higher right now, but I know for a lot of this country where there is no minimum wage above the federal, that's going to be a huge change. So, yeah.
Cool. And just sort of like generally speaking, is there like what else is going on just sort of like in the labor law world? Anything else sort of we should know about?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot, but no.
Whatever we can fit in the last 5 minutes.
Yeah. Well, there's one of the things that's happening right now is one of the board members that helped write the Cemex decision, Gwen Wilcox, her term is expiring, if not this week, next week. It's pretty soon. And so what that means is there's going to be only 2 members that are Democrats on the board, and one member who's a Republican. Even though it's a majority, though, they can't change the law once they lose that seat. So she's going to have to go through the Senate confirmation process again. And Gwen Wilcox is one of the people who put her name on this decision that's very good for workers. So I think it's going to be a tough fight for her. I would keep an eye on that. I would imagine a lot of our traitorous Democrat allies are going to pile on her for doing something as basic as, allowing workers to unionize without retaliation.
Well,
I would keep an eye on that.
That's a good basic lure to go out on, though, if you're,
Yeah. Well, and that was one of the things that I think, there was a lot of discussion about whether or not the board should release their opinions
prior to
because they're scared about this confirmation fight, which I'm all in favor of them. Change the law when you can.
Yeah, definitely. If you don't do it, then it'll never happen.
And there's
going to be a confirmation fight no matter what.
Again, right. There will be another one and another one. So, I'm glad that they at least did this. I think it's possible we start to see a lot more opinions come out this week before her term's up. So, yeah, I would keep an eye out for more this week.
Especially, I mean, if you never I don't know, if you never get the win and you just always put yourself in the position to if we played our cards right, we can get. I mean, I keep it's almost like a joke right now. If the Democrats got 100 senators or something like that, they would be we just got to hold this majority and then all the good stuff will come. Right? It's just always.
I mean, that's what they did. Yeah, that was their logic in the Obama years. And it obviously they just did little. They
No,
did nothing almost.
they got
So,
Obamacare, which was like, basically, I mean, it expanded
yeah,
Medicaid, which was like the one good thing it did, but then it just sort
right,
of like essentially mandated private health care, which is just a
right,
huge giveaway to private companies. And then Ted Kennedy died, and then nothing ever happened again.
right, yeah. But yeah, um, and yeah, I think hopefully there are more opinions this week
Heck yeah.
that will be wins, and you can enjoy some wins.
Yeah, well, if there are more wins that pop up, we're gonna have you back on to talk about them. How about that?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
All right, cool. Well,
All right.
all right. Well,
More
thanks a
David.
lot, David. Where can people
Thank you,
find
guys.
more about what you're doing or anything you're doing?
You can find very bad tweets at USPS veteran.
Yeah.
uh, but mostly I'll be posting very basic pictures of things I bake because I like baking.
What are you baking lately? What are you baking?
I made a galette yesterday
Really?
with some lemon curd and blueberries. And it was really good.
It was really good. Okay. What? How long
Yeah,
you been doing
yeah.
baking for?
Honestly, like not that long, like 3 years, like just before the
It was a
pandemic. Though it was before. I guarantee, like I have Amazon order proof that I ordered all these baking things before before January 2020.
That just means you saw the pandemic coming, is all.
Yeah, I think someone like I had a
You're
dream
like
or
Moses.
something, and I was like, I need to,
I'm
I
not
need to learn how to bake.
No, actually more like Noah. It was like, yeah,
Yeah.
there's going to be a thing, so you need to learn how to do a thing so you can take care of yourself. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, hobby in the house.
Well,
Yeah.
thanks, buddy. I really appreciate you coming
Right.
on talking
No,
to
it's
us.
great to see you. Yeah.
See
Yeah, thanks,
ya.
man.
Bye.
And all right, cool. We'll talk to you later.
Yeah.
See ya. We love you. Bye bye.
How do
Thanks once again to David Gomez for joining us on the show, for talking about the Cemex decision and the sort of way that's affected the National Labor Relations Board and how workers and unions can organize. And it's actually been some really good news. Thanks everybody for listening. You can get more information about Good Morning Comrade by going to goodmorningcomrade.com. You can also get more information about what we're up to by following me on Twitter at eminentprof. You can also follow Robert on Twitter at Comrade Morning. Thank you so much for listening. We love you. Bye-bye. You are listening to WHIV-LP New Orleans 102.3, your only station for social justice and human rights and all wars.